enjoy a small break. Please don't go out. I'm getting on. This visitor who came from Singapore, and we were just discussing about how things work in India. So I said that, look, there is a concept called JIT in Japan. JIT is just-in-time concept. So everything happens just in time. So he said, yeah, but what about India? I said, yes, we have another concept called shit. Somehow in time. So, no, it's not the case with Anand. In fact, people are doing multitasking here, and Shruti had engaged him to go through some important super pitches and get his feedback and things like that. So he was busy there, and when I called, he's rushing down here. So give us 2 minutes, and we'll be on. Thank you. Oh, you're here. Oh, come on. Sorry, we have not met. Please, ladies and gentlemen, please welcome Anand. Hi.
Hi. Sorry, I was at the pitch.
No, I know. That's why I said.
Right,
please.
Thanks.
We concluded earlier, actually.
Is it clear? All right. So, essentially, what I'm going to talk about today is something that's not often addressed at especially game developer conferences, typically like the gaming streams that we've had earlier in NASSCOM. I'm essentially going to be talking about the creative aspect as opposed to the technical aspect. I'm going to be talking about idea creation and IP creation from the creative concept standpoint as opposed to art, which is discussed fairly often. Now, just quickly for me to get an idea, how many of you here are artists? Can you... Okay, how many of you are programmers? How many of you are writers and game designers? Wow, okay, that's something I was not expecting. All right, great. And how many of you are business people? Can you please leave the room, because what I'm going to say is probably going to sound very retarded to you guys, so you might want to go and have some coffee. But okay, so just to put the stuff in context of what I'm speaking about today is look at it as something that I'm trying to just spark some ideas here, and something that normally people here we may not be thinking about. We go. Now this is something that we hear all the time, right? We've heard this many times. Many of you who've been coming to NASSCOM for a while might have seen this in many presentations. So, what does that mean? What really does it mean? Are we honoring this tradition, this legacy that we keep speaking about, that we have been telling stories for thousands of years, and we have the best stories in our traditions and in our myths and our legends and our lore? Are we honoring this tradition? Or have we gotten a little comfortable sitting on the shoulders of giants as opposed to standing on them? So firstly, what I'd like to do is kind of quickly look at some realities that I believe exist in the industry as I take it. And this comes from a bit of my experience. I've been part of creative content creation teams in the film industry for animation. In my present company, we're also creating lots of comics and gaming content. And I had a content creation team, which is not a technical or a development team. So a lot of it will be coming from those perspectives. Now, 40 years ago, we had a wonderful thing called Amar Chitra Katha, right? Now, everybody here is old enough, I guess, to remember that. It was fantastic. It kept an entire generation of us in touch with our myths and our legends and our history and our folklore. I mean, I know a lot, and I know that almost everyone from my generation would say the same thing, that almost everything we know was in these areas was due to the success of Amar Chitra Katha. But like any good drink, it left a hangover. And I think sometimes we need to ask the question, has the success of Amar Chitra Katha, has the success of ACK led us to believe that we need mythology or folklore for, to create successful content that will work? Do we have nothing else? Are we dependent on this space? If I look at we receive a lot of ideas from people. We've also pitched a lot of ideas. We see a lot of ideas floating around. There's a huge skew in favor of, mythology, at least until now. Now, okay, we do see some smaller studios moving out of that space, but largely it still seems to be heavily in favor of content from that space. And sadly, a lot of these creatives, to be perfectly honest, lack imagination and style, especially in a contemporary context. I'm wondering if, we see a lot of, animated content, for instance, where we see characters talking like they were in an Amachitrakatha comic book. Oh, we have been blessed with a beautiful child. Now I will carry him across the river. People don't talk like that. The animation it sounds fine in a comic book, but are we being too faithful to the ACK, style and the legacy and the way they did things? It's over 40 years old. Is it time to get over it? Is it time to move on? Look, Stan Lee, when they were writing comic books for Marvel 50 years ago, that's not how Marvel writes comics today. You don't have, meanwhile, Spider-Man swings through the streets of New York. You don't have stuff like that. Now I will use my Devastator Ray. We don't have stuff like that in comics anymore, which in Marvel and DC, and they don't write like they used to 50 years ago. So could it be that maybe we should also look at, at moving on? And what of the others? What of the other content that we're looking at outside of the ACK space? The obvious content pool is Bollywood, cricket, right? We've got lots of content coming out of the Bollywood and the cricket space. Now, even here, and I speak purely from a creative's perspective, it might be a perfectly good game. The animation might be perfectly all right. But from a creative standpoint of, the writing, the storytelling, a lot of the content still lacks imagination in terms of treatment. We again stick, either it's exactly like Marvel or it's exactly like Amachitrakatha. I just feel sometimes maybe we could do with a little more imagination. And polish is something again that I find lacking in much of the space. I'm not saying all the content is like that. Obviously there's lots of content that's right up there, which is world class, but by and large we still see more of this than we should. And sometimes I look at a game and I see a good idea in there somewhere. I'm like, this could have been a really good game. There's a good game buried in there somewhere, but it seems to have lost steam in the translation. There seems to be something that's lost in the translation and stuff that's, again, not living up to the potential that it could have had. And sometimes I think this could be purely because of bad creatives. Everything else has gone right, but the creatives are hampering where the product can go. So a bad creative can make a decent game look crappy. Spelling mistakes in the speech bubbles. Bad, graphics on the menu design. Simple things. An introduction that's poorly conceived and written can completely destroy a perfectly reasonable and good game. And that's not fair to the developers and to the people who've put in all of that into a game. Like, developers like you put out a good game and then some jerk like me comes up there and writes some crap and slaps it on the box or on your intro, and then that's just taking away from all of that effort. So again, why should we look beyond the obvious? I'm trying to put together some, an argument for why we need to look. It could be useful to sometimes look beyond the usual pool of content that we tend to depend on. Yes, we undoubtedly need good mythology, folklore, Bollywood, cricket content. Nobody's contesting that fact. That is true. We need it in order to travel. It is there. It is great stuff. If we can do good stuff from that content pool, then yes, we need it and it's great. But do all of us need to do that? Do all of us need to be drawing from the same content pool? Or is there stuff that we can look at in order to, maybe do something good and create a little diversity of content that's coming through? And especially for local consumption, see, there are differing views which have been expressed at this conference and about whether India will buy games or we should focus on selling games to the international market where it's already mature. I, for one, strongly believe that yes. Will India buy games? Yes. Will India buy Xbox 360 at 24,000 rupees? Probably not quickly. But we are people who, everybody likes to play games. And I strongly believe that India will be a market for good quality games. I sometimes, there are different approaches. There's definitely room for good quality games to do well in India. If not today, a few years down the line, but we have to start now. So a lot of what I say comes from that. It comes from that belief that, we're not shooting in the dark here. It's not a futile battle. It is something that if we all put in and do some good stuff, if we do good stuff at reasonable costs, there is no reason we cannot succeed. As an industry, individual efforts, good efforts might fail. They might fail. That's how content works. Good movies flop. Good cartoons, nobody watches because it's in the wrong time slot. But we need to keep doing it, and one day everybody will benefit. So a lot of what I say comes from there. And remember, this is a creative lunatic who's talking to you. I'm not one of those hardcore business guys who's worked out their facts and they've looked at the stuff and, they know what they're talking about. They'll give you numbers, they'll give you reasons, they'll give you trends. I don't know any of that stuff. I'm talking to you as a creative guy who completely loves to make games, to make cartoons, to make comic books, and as someone who's been in the industry for a while in different industries and have some experience in business, what is obvious to me as an observer. So I believe we need disruptive content, which is kind of the crux of what I want to tell you guys today, is we need to create stuff that's disruptive, which is the only kind of stuff that will generate momentum. I'll be going a lot more into what exactly I'm talking about, but I believe it's disruptive content that will generate the momentum that opens up the market for then the non-disruptive stuff to take advantage of. You can tell me that vanilla games succeed. Just an ordinary game does really well in a mature market. But it's so much of, I don't see a plain vanilla game busting open a market. It has to be something that creates noise. It has to be something that creates commotion, which people look at and say, whoa, what? It needs to be something that is completely disruptive and that can open up and bust out the market, which can then be exploited by all your plain vanilla games, your bad games, your ordinary games, your good games, all of that. But you need to grow the market. And I believe disruption is one way in which you can do it. And great games with disruptive creatives can then perhaps also travel to global markets. A lot of content that